I'm Alad Gila, one of the co-founders of Reach. Cold Email Hot Takes is a mini video series in which we talk to inspiring sales leaders about their approach to outbound sales. In this week's episode, we're excited to have with us Junior from Pickle. Can you quickly introduce yourself, Junior?
Yeah, I'm Junior Lartey. I'm the sole account executive here at Pickle. We are a conversation intelligence tool helping sales teams capture and share some key moments on Zoom.
That's awesome. Now, Guillermo and I have been following you on LinkedIn for quite some time and love the content that you share. So we're really excited to have with us today. In fact, Guillermo was really excited about asking about hypothesis prospecting. So I thought we'd just jump right into that. It's something that you guys wrote about and you have a blog post on it. So I'd love to hear more what even that is.
Yeah. So hypothesis prospecting, all of this, right, is based on how do you prospect when there's no noticeable buying signals, no noticeable events. It's really easy if you're a recruiter and someone says, hey, we're hiring, right? Okay, well, those two things can align and maybe there's a conversation there. But after you've viewed someone's LinkedIn, there's not always an indication that there's something going on. So then you remove, right, what you're directly selling and you just focus on them and their experience. So it'd be like, hey, Elad, looks like you've been running this podcast. My guess is, my hypothesis is that you're trying to find more people to bring onto this podcast. Is that the case? And maybe I provide some value around that. But it's like focusing more on just you yourself and hypothesizing about something you may be going through because of the position that you're in.
I love that. That actually reminds me a lot of problem prospecting as well, which I think is probably somewhat of a similar approach. Mark Ackers, who would join us for one of our podcasts, he's a big proponent of it. So the same kind of idea is that you really look to understand what somebody in that role that you're reaching out to might be experiencing, some problem that might be keeping them up at night, and then just really showing that you understand what they might be going through on a daily basis, right? And so it's kind of a similar. Yeah. Let me focus on that. I think it's super effective.
And the more universally true you can make that hypothesis, something that everybody experiences every day, then the more it'll just ring true, right? You want to talk about universal truths because those are hard to decline or defeat, so.
Yeah, and I think on some maybe even more basic level, you're kind of creating empathy, or you're showing that you understand something about them that they might be either dealing with or needing or wanting, just as in that role, right? I think that's super important in sales, is creating that empathy.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to ask you is especially in this world where so many people are now reaching out, I think a lot more people are in sales, doing outbound sales, sending emails. How do you stand out, right? How do you get noticed by your prospects?
So one thing I've really appreciated, there's a few sales leaders out there that have taken screenshots of their inbox and just shown subject lines, because that's where it all starts. If you want an email to be opened, it's going to be opened based on the subject line because they don't know you yet. So subject line, it's the first thing they see. It's the most important thing, removing some of those marketing jargon type words like webinar, virtual, online, free, 15 minutes. None of that ever works anymore. Whereas, if I can do something more tied to you as a person or about you, something that I've read, something that you've been a part of, right? I'm trying to mention something about you in the subject line. That's my strategy. That's how I try to go about thinking. I'm in someone's inbox. Why would they open it?
I remember you posting something recently on LinkedIn about even listening to people's podcasts themselves and tying into something that you may have heard them say or something they've written about. I think it's amazing that is the ideal when it comes to personalization as well, right? Is to show the person that you've done your research about them. If people are creating content, they probably want it to be referenced, right? If people are putting themselves out there, they usually want that to be referenced. And I think that's us showing them that we've done our work. And what's more, I guess on some psychological level, we like to be flattered, like to be noticed. And so seeing that oh, hey, you looked up something about me is kind of, it works, right?
I mean, if I was prospecting you, I would for sure that email would say like email hot takes, right? Because it's a podcast that you run. If I was to be prospecting Guillermo, your co-founder, I would be like, I know you played tennis, like tennis looking guy. I would tie something about the way that he looks to tennis because it's so apparently there. But that's like my strategy is I know there's information about you out there. I'm just going to tie that, right up front. So you almost have no excuse but to open this email.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's definitely the way to go. So speaking of personalization, obviously that's essentially what you're doing. I mean, I'm wondering how, beyond the subject line, how are you approaching personalization? How important is personalization to the way that you like to write your cold emails?
Yeah, I think at this stage, honestly, without personalization, you're kind of screwed. Like if you want higher reply rates, then you have to personalize. You just have to. So I look at it as like there's two different types. This is just in my mind. I'm not talking, there's other salespeople that will say other things, but this is how I see it. There's relevancy. This is like the things that are based on timing or based on your role, your world, right? Like what you're currently working with. And then there's targeting. And this is more based on you, based on your post, based on your experience. So I try to look at it in those two ways. If I'm going to personalize, it's either going to be relevant because, you're hiring a bunch of AEs and that ties in with what I'm selling, or it's going to be targeted. You're a VP of sales, and so you likely have this experience that I can speak to.
Right. No, that it seems to be nowadays, like if you're not personalizing, how are you, like, why would anybody give you the time of day? Right. I think it's,
yeah.
I think you have to do your research. It takes a lot more time, obviously, to do it, but the results kind of speak for themselves. And so it sounds like you will do a mix also of like account-based personalization. Could be something about the company they're hiring, there's something's going on with the company, but could also be potentially about the actual prospect themselves. Is that as well? Like, would you reference something about their biography or something about their career or something?
Yeah. One of my personal favorites is people that were formerly in the food industry, right? Like someone who was a server at some, nacho house in Tennessee. I will Google search till I find this nacho house, till I find the menu. My subject line says like the deep fried pickles with extra cheese. And then I'll like break down, like, hey, how was my order? Not knowing the world that you're in, not having ever eaten there. Did my order land? Did I get the right thing? And then like similarly, your reps, they're having conversations every day. They don't know if what they're pitching lands. Pickle will help you do that. Right. So like, I'm like, it might be a little too out there for some people, but for me, I found that it works really well and people are at least, willing to hear out the rest of the pitch because I took, the extra couple minutes to Google search where they served nachos for 2 years.
Yeah, amazing. That is some serious dedication, and I love that. But I like also how you're tying it to your pitch, or name pitch, you want to call that, or to the value prop of Pickle, or to maybe even tying it to the problem that they might be facing in their role or on their team. I think that's kind of the key, right? It's like you have the personalization, but you can kind of weave it in a way that does feel like it makes sense, right? Just saying like, hey, I saw you went to Harvard, like who cares, right? Like, but if it's somehow you're able to tie it in, then of course it becomes meaningful.
Yeah, I love the college plays. Those are always good, right? You went to Harvard, so X, Y, and Z. Those just never work anymore. It's just not valuable unless you went to the same school, unless you were part of the same clubs, did the same program. Just because somebody went somewhere, everyone went to school somewhere. There's just no value in doing that.
I
Very low
agree.
impact.
I completely agree. When you reach out or like during your sequences, are you thinking about how to add value? It's something that we hear a lot of people talk about, right? It's like, you're supposed to be sharing resources, blog posts, reports, offer something that could be useful to them. Do you subscribe to that? Do you do that as well?
Okay. This is another thing, like take with a grain of salt. This is just my opinion. I tend to lean towards interest-based prospecting. And then after that, value selling. So value is really hard, because it's completely based on you, not on me. So you may be hiring and I come in as a recruiter to say like, hey, I can help you hire, but that doesn't mean you're interested in working with a recruiting agency. It's like, but you said you're hiring. So it's like, I tend to lean towards interest-based prospecting. Like, does this at all sound of interest to you? That's like my cold call CTA and my email CTA is like, is there any interest here? Because like I can work with interest. You show me you're interested, great. Let's push for time. Let's schedule a meeting, and then I can show real value there. But I mean, I don't want to drop you my most valuable pitch when I have no idea if it matters. You might not care at all.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But so tell me, like, in your sequence, let's say in your email sequence, I might have multiple stages. If you don't get a reply on your first or second email, are you looking at different ways of kind of reiterating the same problem? Are you taking it from a different angle? How are you trying to get people to say, yes, actually, I am interested?
Yep. Okay. One of my favorite emails, and it's not because it gets a ton of replies or anything like that. It is just so outside of the sales email prospecting box. So something with Pickle is we have these little call ratios, right? Is I talk this much, Elad talk this much. So I went back and I took 4 screenshots of those. Some are like 50-50, some are 80-20. And then I pose, to the person I'm prospecting, I say, which deal do you think I lost based on the talk ratio? Right. And it's like, that's not me asking for a meeting. That's not me asking for time. And they're just like, what is this? Like, what is talk ratio? Or they like look at it and sometimes they get the answer right. And I'm like, hey, how'd you know? Sometimes they get it wrong. And then it's a chance for me to educate, well, I dominated the conversation. So that's not a good thing. Here's why. Right. It's just like, it's solely based on interest. It's not really based on, I'm trying to sell you the value of Pickle. It's just like, let's do an activity and see, if you want to engage or
not. That's really clever. I like that. I'm gonna steal that. So tell me, so since you're an AE and you're probably handling, the full cycle, I think you probably face this yourselves. I think we've all faced this, which is like conversations can start to slow down. They can, that initial interest can kind of wane, maybe, especially with a lot of stakeholders have to come and get involved in the conversation. What do you do to try to create urgency or keep momentum going when you're working these deals?
Yeah. One of the most underutilized methods is prospecting the rest of the team. If you've chatted with the decision maker, I just go ahead and assume that that's permission to talk to anybody else at the organization as pertaining to the problem we're trying to solve. So then I would be hitting up the account executives and I'd say something like, my subject line specifically would be like, Elad, I chatted with Guillermo. And because of that, you're going to be like, oh, that's my co-founder. I better at least look at this email, And then from there, I'm trying to pull more pain. I'm trying to build a use case. I'm prying for data, information. Maybe even I don't have a champion. Maybe I can find one there, right? So it's like the decision maker, maybe not the decision maker, but the conversation opener has given me permission. So I'm just now going to open the floodgates and talk to as many people at the organization as I can.
That's brilliant. And that's a great way to kind of generate that internal conversation, right? I think we're all in some way looking for validation from the others around us. And so if you hear that, oh, actually, you also had a good feeling from this person, or you also like what they're up to, it kind of helps maybe validate some intuitions that the initial person you were speaking to had. And it just kind of creates kind of like a snowball effect, which I think is really effective. Because if you speak to one person, we don't know what happens on the inside, right? We never know if they actually forward the content. We never know if they're really pulling in other people and they're having that conversation. So it's a great way to kind of force that through.
Totally. And I've seen 2 main things happen when I do this. One, I will either book time with the account executive, which is great. We'll spend, 15, 20 minutes. I'll just demo the platform. They'll show me some things that are good. Then I'll use that content, what they told me, to then reach back out. So now I have more targeted material. Or I'll get an email from the person that's been a little slow to respond, and they're like, hey, picking this back up. I know you talked to Elad and, let's get some time on the calendar. So I've seen, those 2 things are what typically happen.
That's brilliant. That's amazing. So when it comes to all of those touch points, I'm curious if in your, at least maybe when it comes to Pickle, obviously because every company is a little bit different and every situation is a little bit different. Have you found like an optimal amount of touch points when you're reaching out? Have you found kind of what the optimal sequence is, or it has to be a mix of LinkedIn, phone calls, emails, et cetera?
Yep. So I'm in the 8 to 12 touch range over 20 days. That's across calls, that's across emails, that's across LinkedIn. So that's like the baseline for me. But you can overdo it, right? You can have too many touch points. And I'm glad that you said, have you found the optimal? Because there really is a way to optimize your cadences, right? And here's how you do that. You go back to your cadence, you look at the top 3 places in your cadence that you are getting responses or booking meetings. Then you optimize your cadence based on those. So if it's cold calls, maybe you add a few more cold calls to the beginning half of your sequence, right? Like add 3 consecutive cold call steps. If it's email, look at the content and get to that content sooner in your cadence. That way you can it's like shortening a sales cycle. You want to shorten your prospect cadence as much as you can. So give yourself some time to prospect, then go back and see where are the top 3 places that I have the highest reply rates and I'm booking the most meetings, and then optimize around those 2 things.
Yeah, so we do. I mean, especially when it comes to emails, we're constantly looking at the data of our emails. We're testing new copy. We're testing new structures. We're testing, the intervals between the emails. We're constantly testing everything, right? And it's like, I think there's one main takeaway for me in sales is that you have to be constantly iterating, testing, trying, experimenting until you find something. And you might find it might work for a month or 2, and then you realize you have to keep going back to the drawing board and try something new again. And I think that's kind of the beauty and and maybe the annoying part of the process. But once you embrace it, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the pitch, like you said, it changes over time, which is really strange. You're like, I've nailed it. This is the message. And then, maybe you start to see a decline or, a decrease in replies. So you go back, you have to tweak it and change things up. It's kind of weird how those things happen, and I don't fully understand it. But you can get to that optimized stage and then just know okay, from here, let's just make the messaging better and better over time.
I know. I don't know why it happens either, but it seems like this law of nature that at some point what you're doing is going to stop working. And how much it could last a couple of months, it could be longer, but at some point the results are going to decrease and you're going to have to go back. And so I think the ones who end up winning are the ones who are kind of remain dominant in their field, are the ones that say, yep, I'm cool, that's I was expected. Now we go back and we do it do it differently.
Yeah, totally.
Well, Junior, it's been super fun chatting with you. A lot of really, really valuable tips for us and for everyone who's watching. So really appreciate it. I'm going to look forward to watching more of your content. Guillermo and I steal so much of what you do. So keep it
awesome.
Coming.
Awesome. It's all yours. Take it all, right? That's the point. That's the point of all this.
Exactly. Well, thanks again. Cool. Take care, man.
Okay. Thanks. We'll see you.